Hi everyone. So I'm finally going to give y'all another book video. Today's book is My White Knight. It is a it's a gay for you romance. It's a by awakening type thing. It was written in like 2 or 3 years ago, published at the beginning of last year. So it's a little hazy, but I'm going to do my best. So it's about two men. They're strangers. Blake Fletcher and Easton Cooper. Blake, it starts out with Blake driving down a dark, deserted country highway in the middle of the night. He had just found out that his fiance had been cheating on him their entire relationship. And the way her affair was exposed was because their 3-year-old daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. And when he got tested to do a bone marrow transplant, that's when it came out he was not the father. His uncle is the father, and she's still in a side relationship with him to this day, to the present. She's always been cheating on him with his uncle. So he broke up with her, and so he lost his girlfriend, he lost his daughter, he lost his home, and he lost his job because his job was working with her father, Laura. Her name's Laura. He was working with Mr. Ashland, her father. So he lost everything, but he doesn't care. He's heading out of town, no intentions of ever coming back. So he's distracted with his anger and hurt and doesn't see the dog in the road, and he hits the dog, and he gets out, puts her in the car, turns back around and goes back to town, takes her to the nearest vet, and he sits there with that dog for like 6 hours almost, and he spends like $600, but the dog doesn't make it. The dog dies. So he gets her tag, finds, and the address is on the tag, and he drives out to Easton Cooper's home to tell him that his dog is dead and that he killed her. And when he shows up, it's this rundown, dilapidated house. Like the road to the house, the drive, is like a mile long, and he almost missed it because there's no marker. It's just barely visible through the trees because it's so overgrown. And once he gets there, and everything's run down. The house is here. There's a barn here with a pond next to the barn. Everything's overgrown. There's a rundown truck in the front yard with only one tire on it. It's the chicken coop is falling. Everything's falling apart. So he gets out the car and he's heading up for the porch because it's a Victorian, so the ground's down here and the house is actually up here. Before he can get to the steps, though, the door bursts open, and this grungy looking man stumbles out, drunk off his ass, with a shotgun. And he's like, "You can't have this house. I told you I was going to find it, and I was going to give you the money, and blah, 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 blah." So Blake freaks out. He sees his whole life flash before his eyes. But he convinces the man that he's not there about the house. And then he tells him about the dog Ella. Her name was Ella. Easton crumbles. Grown fucking man, slobbering drunk, falls down and just sobs like a baby. And then he passes out. Well, Blake, being the kind of man that he is, he's like, I can't leave. What if he wakes up in the morning and he doesn't, because he's so drunk, he doesn't remember. All he's going to know is that his dog's collar is on the counter and he's never going to see her again. He's like, I can't do that to him. So he bunkers down, and the house is empty. Everything in the house is completely void of furniture, other than there is, like when you walk in the front door, there's a room here, like a living room here, and probably a dining room on this side, and it's all one big open space. And then you can see a wall, because the stairs go up like that. And then underneath the stairs, a hallway that takes you down to the kitchen and another living room. And at the foot of the stairs is a sunroom where the bay window, like the bay window is, that goes 2 stories tall. There is a couch in the bay window. There's a couch in the living room, a TV that hasn't been touched in looks like 2 years. And then there's a bed in the master bedroom upstairs, because while he's passed out, Blake snoops. Other than that, the house is completely void of furniture. So he bunkers down on the couch in the bay window, because he picked up he picked up Easton off the floor and put him on the couch in the living room. And when Easton wakes up, there's another confrontation, and it takes him a minute, but he does end up remembering that Ella's dead. So Blake takes Easton to town to pick up his dog's remains, and when he gets him back to the house, Easton's like, just leave. He's like, let me help you bury her. And he's like, no, get out, go. So he leaves. And he goes back to town and he checks into a hotel room, because at this point he doesn't know what to do. The whole thing with Easton kind of threw him off, and he's like riddled with guilt over killing this dog. And so he's like sitting in this hotel room for about 2 or 3 days. Laura keeps calling, come home, come home. And he's like, I'm not coming home. You know, once a cheater, always a cheater. I'm not, it's no. And he looks over on the dresser of the hotel room and sees that he still has Easton's keys. So he takes the keys and he heads back to Easton's. When he goes up the steps, the front door is open, but the screen door is closed. And he's like knocking, but nobody's answering. So he lets himself in. And when he rounds the foot of the stairs into the living room, he sees Easton sitting on the couch, the butt of the shotgun between his feet and the barrel. And YouTube is going to get so pissed. There. So he tackles him and takes the gun away from him. And Easton's like, what the fuck are you doing? Just leave, let me do this. And he's like, no, you're not doing this. He goes, I'm going to do this eventually. As soon as you leave, I'm going to do it again. You know, this is happening. He's like, oh, well, then in that case, I'm not leaving. He's like, you can't do that. I'll call the cops. And he's like, well, you go ahead and call the cops, and I'll tell them that you're suicidal, and then they'll put you in a psych ward. And he's like, you got to leave sooner or later. He goes, nope, I have no job. I have no home. Consider me officially your brand new roommate. I'm home. And so it is. Blake plants roots. No intentions of leaving until Easton is sober and no longer wishing self-harm. So he's there for a couple of days, and he's like, realizes he's got to go back to his hotel room to get his stuff and check out. So he's like, come with me. He's like, no. He's like, yeah, you're coming with me. He's like, I'm not going with you. Because he's like, as soon as you leave, as soon as because in Easton's mind, as soon as Blake leaves, he can do the job. And he's like, I will buy you the biggest bottle I can find at the ABC store if you come with me. And he's like, oh, well then, hell yeah. So they go back to town. He checks out, keeps his word, buys them whiskey. They go home. And Easton's plan is to just drink a little bit, act like he's slobbering drunk, act like he's passing out. And then when Blake goes to sleep, but because he's an alcoholic, he ends up drinking the whole thing and passing out. While he's passed out, Blake goes around the house and he searches the entire house, finds all the booze, even the secret ones, and stashed away, and he gets rid of everything. And he hides all the knives. He finds a safe and he puts them in the safe. Everything's locked away. All the beer's gone. When Easton wakes up, this clearly infuriates him. So he tries to attack Blake, but he has no energy. He gets one punch and he's down. And it wasn't even a bad punch. It barely hurt Blake. And that only humiliates Easton further because he used to be a professional athlete. So the days go by, and he's right there with Easton the whole time, helping, cleaning up after he pukes and all that. And then one day he falls asleep he's on that little couch again in the sunroom, the bay window. And when he wakes up, he can't find Easton anywhere. He runs around the whole house, he can't find him anywhere, and he freaks out. And so he runs outside to make sure that he didn't get in his truck and leave. And he sees him walking into the pond, and he's hallucinating. You can hallucinate when you're going through withdrawals. And he's hallucinating about his daughter. Being in the pond, and Easton screaming, I'm coming, baby, I'm going to get you, you're okay. Well, by this point, Blake already knows that Easton's daughter is dead. But during his snooping, he found some pictures of Easton and a woman getting married and then having a baby, and the baby growing up, and the baby with Ella. Ella was the baby was Camilla. Her name was Camilla. It was Camilla's dog. And he found a partially burned newspaper article that says that Camilla had died in a car accident. That's all he knows. So he's like hauling ass after him, but Easton goes down before he can get to him, and it takes them a couple minutes to find him. So he finally gets him up, but he's not breathing, so he does the CPR and gets Easton back. So he decides from there on out they sleep in the same bed, because obviously sleeping in the same, within 10-15 feet of each other is not good enough, because Easton got away from him. So Easton wakes up and he's in bed with another man, and Blake kind of rolls over and like nuzzles up against him and kisses the back of his shoulder. And in his sleep, Blake is thinking he's nuzzling up against Laura. And Easton's like, what the fuck are you doing? So he kind of like kicks him. And then Blake wakes up, and Easton acts like he's still sleeping, because he's like, I can't have that confrontation. I'm not ready for that confrontation. And when Blake wakes up, he's like, oh shit. And then he realizes he kind of likes it. And then he's like, oh shit again. And he gets up and runs away. Um, so to keep himself busy while, because he's going stir crazy, Blake decides to start fixing up the house because that's what he did. He was a contractor. So he starts fixing up the house. Well, the more sober Easton gets, the more bored he gets, so he gets up and starts helping too. He's got all the supplies in the barn because he was going to fix it up before the accident with Camilla happened. He'd already purchased everything. So there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of supplies already in the barn, so they are able to do a lot of work. And they do this thing, they start falling into this thing where Blake will whistle a song, and when Easton figures it out, he'll start singing along, and that's how they communicate with each other. But they went from, the strangers to enemies because Easton hated Blake for interfering and not letting him die. And now they're slowly transitioning into friends, where Easton is starting to enjoy Blake's presence. And the longer he's there, the more excited he gets about fixing. Because this house is it's been in his family. His great whatever grandfather built this house. Because there's a peach orchard in the backyard, and that's how the Cooper family has been making their success since like the early 1900s, is through the peaches. And his pop was diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's, and that's how the house got dilapidated and run down, and that's how the orchards died. And before he passed away, Easton promised his grandfather that he would bring back the legacy. He's already failed his wife, he's already failed his career, he's failed his daughter, he failed Ella. All he has left to redeem himself is Pop's legacy. So he starts getting more and more excited about, because he thought it was a done deal. He thought there was no way he could ever fix the house. But now that Blake's there, he's like, maybe we can do this. And so he starts getting excited about something other than and drinking. And so he's starting to heal. And as the time goes by, they start confiding each other. And towards the beginning of the withdrawals, he's like, "Why do you care so much?" And he admits that starting at the age of 8, his uncle has started to molest and rape him. And it didn't stop until he was 19 years old. And when he told his grandfather, who was raising them both, what was happening, he blamed Blake, called Blake the troublemaker, and sent Blake to live in a group home. So, by the time he was 19 years old, Blake was a raging alcoholic. And had tried several times to... And he has a scar from here all the way to here, where he almost succeeded. And Laura is the one who cleaned him up, got him sober, put him back on his feet, got him a job with her father, and then that's how they got together. And even knowing why Blake was the way he was, she still started an affair with his uncle. So it just goes to show you what kind of a cunt she is. So pretty much they both lost their woman, they both lost their daughter, they both lost their grandfather, they both lost their careers, and they both became alcoholics who idealized suicide. So they were very similar. And Because of that, Easton finds himself trusting him more and more, enough to admit what happened to him. And he finally tells him, you know, I was a professional baseball player for the Blue Jays. And he's like, oh my God, that's where I know you from. Because the whole time he thought he recognized him, but he didn't. Easton Cooper, because when he was a professional athlete, he went by Matt Cooper. So when he was a professional athlete, he was married. He got married to his first love, Tasha, when they were pretty young. But once he became famous, his ego got out of hand, and he's like, had all these women throwing themselves at him, and he's like, oh, this is kind of nice. So he starts having affairs. I mean, like, lots and lots of, like, hundreds of affairs over the 15-year span. And Tasha, as she knew, she turned a blind eye, and she just, because she loved him so much, she's like, no, he wouldn't, you know? So she ignored all the red flags and never said anything. And then one night, Easton was meeting with one of his girlfriends at a hotel, and Tasha called. And said that Tasha called and said that their daughter was sick. She was spending the night with a friend. He needed to go pick her up. So Blake goes and picks up his daughter. The friend's parents had already given Tasha, like, baby Tylenol. So by the time he picks her up, she passes out in the back seat almost immediately. She's like 11 years old. Well, Easton's like, all right, she's out. She's not waking up for a couple hours. So he goes back to the hotel room and leaves his sick daughter pass out in the back seat, goes inside that room and fucks his girlfriend. Then, when they're leaving and he's taking the girlfriend back home, the girlfriend starts to mess around, trying to give him a hand job and a blow job while he's driving. He loses control, swerves off the road, crashes, and Camilla wasn't buckled properly, so she gets ejected from the car and she dies. Now, the girlfriend and Easton lie and say that he swerved to miss a deer. So that's why he was cleared of all charges. However, there's no overlooking the fact that Easton was with a woman. So Tasha finds out about the affair, and 3 days after the funeral, leaves him. And that's his story. So the last couple years, he's been drowning himself in booze, trying to kill himself. Because, I know, YouTube, whatever. Because he thinks that's the only way to bring justice to Camilla. Yeah. So, the more time that goes by, the less harmful Easton seems to himself. So one day, while he's asleep, Blake goes to town and he adopts a chocolate lab to gift to Easton, because he's planning on leaving soon. Well, this upsets Easton. He's like, oh, well then fine, just leave. Everybody leaves, you know. He's upset that Blake is leaving. By this point, there is a codependency thing going on. One night, Easton is sleeping in his bed, Blake is downstairs on the couch, and he wakes up in the middle of the night to hard on, and it's the first time he's had a hard on since the night his daughter died. At this point, he thought it was broken. He thought he had killed any possibilities of that happening again with too much booze. So, curious, he starts to masturbate. And Blake gets woken up because he hears noises upstairs, and he's like, it's way past the withdrawals. He should not be getting sick. Is he okay? So he hurries upstairs to check. Once he's at the top of the stairs, he realizes he's not sick. He realizes what's happening, and yet he still goes to the door. And Easton looks over, sees him in the doorway, and doesn't stop. Blake should have left. Easton should have stopped. Neither did what they were supposed to do. Next thing you know, they're both masturbating, watching each other. And after they're done, Blake calls us back downstairs. And the next day, they kind of avoid each other. Blake is like, I'm leaving in the morning. This is done. He's fine. He's safe. I'm leaving in the morning. But when the morning comes, he doesn't leave. And they end up avoiding each other all day long. And by this point, Easton and Chester, the dog, are doing daily runs in the woods. So when he gets done with his run, he comes back inside and he plops down on the couch and next to Blake, and he's tired. He's huffing and puffing. Blake's like, dinner's ready. He's like, hang on, let me chill for a minute. And they start talking about what happened last night. And they're like, okay, let's rationalize this. Let's break it down. You know, they've been cooped up in this house for like 2 months together, with no outside. Only outside interaction they have is the couple times Blake has had to go to town for supplies for the house or for groceries. Other than that, they've had no outside contact with anybody. So they were blaming it on that. And they start talking about it, and next thing you know, they're both masturbating again on the couch together. And Blake kind of scoots over to Easton, and he like kind of touches him, and he's just like, oh hell yeah, that's the first physical touch he's had in over 2 years, so he's all for it. And so they both come, and Blake is so involved at this point, he dips down to give him a blowjob, but because his body's not used to that kind of stimulation, it's more discomfort than pleasure. So Easton's like grabs him and flings him off, and Blake's like, oh shit, I'm sorry. You know, he thought he's like, no, it's not you. It's just, I'm not used to it. It kind of hurts a little bit. So during their chatting, Blake admits that other than the physical contact he's had with his uncle, Laura's the only one he's ever been intimate with. Easton is only the second person in his entire life he's ever been sexually attracted to. The attraction grows, and one day they're swimming in the pond together, and they're kissing and making out, and they start touching and exploring and make each other come again. And afterwards, they know that when they get inside, things are going to go all the way. But neither one of them's in a hurry to do that. They're just enjoying one another's time. So they ended up just spending the next few hours out in the pond playing and swimming and playing with their dog, Chester. And sure enough, when they get inside, Easton takes their clothes to the washing machine. Blake goes to the kitchen to start cooking dinner. But Easton comes in and they kiss and they have sex for the first time. And neither one of them's second guessing the fact that they're both lived their whole lives, especially Easton. I mean, he's been a womanizer. And neither one of them's questioning their attraction to one another. It just feels normal. It feels right and natural. So more time goes on and they're full-blown lovers by now. Both by this time. And things are going really good. Blake is falling. Blake admits that he's falling in love with him. And one day, Easton goes on his daily jog with Chester. And while he's gone, a car pulls up. And this man gets out. And he's a banker. And he's here to tell Easton that his time is up. And the sheriff is on his way to evict him from the house. By this point, Blake is sure he's in love with Easton. So he's like, I have $20,000 that I can put down, and my credit score is this. I have no credit. My car's paid off. Blah, 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 blah. He's like, can I take over the loan to, can I buy the loan from the bank so that the bank doesn't repo it? And he's like, yeah, sure. So he makes an appointment to come by the next day to fill out the paperwork. And as soon as he's going, he calls Mr. Ashland, Laura's father, and he's like, can I have my job back? Because he needs a job to, they're not going to give him a loan without a job. And Ashland's like, yeah, sure. Now, Ashland thinks this means he's going to be able to convince Blake to go back to Laura. He doesn't say anything to Easton because he wants to make sure that everything is in line. He doesn't want to get his hopes up, So the next day he goes to the bank. When he gets home, Easton's kind of pissed. He's like, because he saw a text from Ashland saying, welcome back to work or something like that. So he's pissed, thinking that he's going back to Laura. So they get an argument about that, and he's like, no, I did this. And he tells him what he did. And he's like, why the fuck would you do that? He's like, he's so neglected because he's been completely shut off and forgotten about for almost 3 years since the funeral. He lost everything. So he's been alone until Blake. He had been absolutely 100% isolated and alone by himself with only Ella to talk to. So when he hears what he did, he's like, you're trying to steal my house. Since day one, you've told me what a gold mine I'm sitting on. So this whole thing, everything between us, you've been trying to steal my house this whole time. And he's like, no, I'm falling in love with you. And well, Easton liked that. So this is us. He's like, Easton's like, so we're going to do this. We're going to stay together. We're going to fix this house. We're going to bring back Pop Pop's legacy. And Easton's like, Blake's like, yeah, I'm in this forever. But there's only one problem. The house is not strictly in Easton's name. It's in Easton and Tasha's name. So that means Easton now has to contact Tasha to have her sign paperwork so he can legally sell the house to the bank so the bank can sell the house to Blake. He calls Tasha. She comes over. She hears Blake upstairs and she's like, who's that? Oh, he's just a friend. Because ever since the day he lost her, he has been praying to whatever God will listen to him to give him one more shot with Tasha. And this is the first time he's seen her since she left him. They're instantly attracted to one another. She's like, wow, you're sober. And he's like, yeah, I am. And she's like, well, you look good. And that's what he wants to hear. So she signs the paperwork and then she leaves. The next day, Blake takes the paperwork back to the bank so it can be processed. And while he's gone, Tasha calls and she's like, can we meet for lunch? And he's like, absolutely, hell yes. So they go and they meet for lunch, and she makes it known right away that she wants him. And they're like kissing, and he's ready. He's ready to pull her in the bathroom at the restaurant and just do it. But then he starts realizing that he's following the same pattern. He had Tasha. He took advantage of Tasha by having all these affairs. And he starts thinking about all the things that Blake has done for him. And he's like, Blake's a really great guy. He's admitted that he's falling in love with me. He's done this for me. He's committed himself to me in this house, and he wants forever. I'm repeating history if I go through this and sleep with Tasha. So he's like, I can't do it. He's like, for once, I'm going to not think about myself. I'm not going to think about my dick, and I'm not going to hurt somebody. I'm not going to take somebody for granted. So he leaves. He walks away and he leaves her. And he goes home. Well, when Blake gets home from the bank, he's like, well, because of the divorce decree, Tasha does not need to come to court. Everything's done. Everything's been processed. Boom. It's done. The house is going to be mine. Everything's already in the computers and everything. Well, Easton jumps on him. They start fucking. And Blake is like, he's got Blake bent over the island at the bar at the kitchen, the bar at the kitchen. And he's fucking him, and Blake is like, I love you, I love you, I love you. And then they both come. And then Easton looks over, and Tasha's standing in the doorway. Because you can, from the front door, you can see straight through the middle of the house, all the way to the back door. And the kitchen, the bar. And she's like, oh my God. And Easton freaks out. So he like yanks his jeans back on. He's like, no, you don't understand. It's not what it looks like. And he's like chasing Tasha. Blake puts his pants on. He goes out and stands on the porch, and he's like watching Easton like chase Tasha's car across the property. He's like banging on her window. Please don't, please. Well, Blake's not a fool, you know. It's quite obvious. But Tasha takes off. And then Easton's like, oh my God. Easton's freaking out. And then all of a sudden, boom. Uh-oh. Blake. So he turns around and looks, and Blake's standing on the top of the porch, and he's like, yeah, I'm here, bitch, remember? He's like, Blake. And Blake's like, turns around, goes inside, goes upstairs, gets a blanket and pillow from the master suite, and he locks himself up in one of the guest bedrooms and refuses to talk to, Easton's beating on the door, trying to get to talk to him. He's like, nope. So finally Easton gets up, goes to sleep. The next morning he wakes up and he tries again. He's like knocking on the door. He's like, babe, please, we gotta talk. And when he tries the doorknob, it's unlocked. He goes in. Blake is gone. He freaks out. He runs around the house, finds the closet empty. Blake is gone. And he is absolutely gutted. He does not know how to do sobriety without Blake. He is completely dependent on him. So he's, like I said, he's freaking out, and he runs outside to see if, just in case Blake is still there and hasn't left yet. He runs outside to see if maybe he can catch him packing up to the car or whatever. But instead of seeing Blake's car, he sees Tasha's, and Tasha's walking up the steps, and he's like, "Oh, hi." So she comes in and they start talking, and she's like, "What did I see yesterday?" And he's like trying to tell her, and he's like tells her everything Blake's done for him since they met. And she's like, "Oh, well then you're not really attracted to him." He's like, "What do you mean I'm not attracted to him?" She's like, "It's called white knight syndrome. He did this, he saved you, he's helping you, blah, 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 blah. It's called white knight syndrome is the thing." And he's like, "Whatever." And she's like, "Well, I can't stay, but I was wondering if you would like to have dinner with me tonight." And he's like, "Oh, hell yeah." So she's like, "Great, I'll pick you up around 7. So she leaves. He gets ready. He starts getting ready, and she comes back. They go out to dinner, and she takes him. She's such a bitch. She takes him to his favorite bar to test him, to see how well he will behave at his favorite drinking environment. So he's pissed. By the time the date's over and she brings him home, because Blake has his keys, he can't go anywhere. He has no car keys. So by the time she brings him home, he is infuriated because all night long, not only does she take him to his favorite drinking spot, but all night long she keeps making dig after dig after dig, bringing up his past mistakes, making snide comments about drinking and all this other stuff. And for years he's waited for this moment, and he's finally gotten it, and now he just wants it over. He wants her gone. He's done. So, but she makes herself at home. She comes in, she sits down on the couch, and when she starts loving on him and kissing on him, naturally he's ready to go. So they start fucking. They start messing around, they start having sex, but he can't get Blake out of his head. And he starts losing his erection, and the only way to keep it is to think about Blake. And yeah, so yeah, so they fall into this pattern. She stays with him during the weekdays. Friday mornings she'll leave for work, and then Monday night she'll come back. On the weekend she stays with her parents, where she's been since the divorce. And he actually starts to look forward to the weekend without her. It has now been a week since Blake left, and it's just getting harder and harder for him to deal. And he misses him. And he doesn't want to be with Tasha, but he had longed for this for so long and prayed for so long, and now that he's finally got it, he feels like, I have no right to turn it away. This is what I've been wanting, you know? Monday morning, Easton's sitting on the front porch in the swing, and he starts thinking about some of the shit that Tasha said to him about Blake over the last week. So he pulls out his phone. He looks at white knight syndrome. It says 7 symptoms of white knight syndrome. So he's like reading out symptom number 1. Okay, well, that's a stretch. Symptom number 2. Okay, that kind of sounds like Blake. Symptom number 3. That's definitely Blake. Symptom number 4. Well, this is bullshit, you know? So he's like, I don't want to look at it anymore. And he's sitting there and he's stewing over this, trying to determine if what he felt for Blake was legit or if it was white knight syndrome. And all these vehicles start pouring up into his yard from the trail, from the drive through the woods. And he's like, what the fuck is this? And then all these workers get out. And then one of the vehicles, Blake gets out with Mr. Ashland. And he's like, oh. And some of the workers start carrying supplies into the house. And right past Easton, without even speaking, he's like, what the fuck are you doing in my house? He's like, no, this is Mr. Fletcher's home. He's like, no, it's my house. He's like, no, this is Mr. Fletcher's house, and him and Mr. Ashland are fixing it up to sell it as a bed and breakfast. So Easton, again, loses his shit. He storms down the steps, and he's like, Blake, I need to talk to you. So he, like, grabs him and yanks him into the barn. And he's like, what do you expect me to do? He's like, I am now indebted in this house, and I have to do what I have to do, you know. They're like arguing and going back and forth, and they admit that neither one of them had ever intended on letting anybody know that they were together. He's like, well, how is that supposed to work anyways? And he's like, you're ashamed of me. He's like, I'm not ashamed of you. And he's like, really? Let's take my hand. And he's like, take my hand, walk me outside, and introduce me to your future father-in-law as your man. And Blake freaks out. He's like, exactly what the fuck I thought. You're a fucking hypocrite and you're a coward. But there's nothing he can do. The house isn't his anymore. It's Blake's. So sorry, I got a message. So he takes off in the woods for his daily jog with Chester. And that night, Tasha comes home. He's sitting on the porch in the swing, and Tasha comes home. Right before Tasha gets home, Blake comes out and sits on the porch, on the steps, and he makes a phone call. Well, he gets a phone call from Laura, and from what Easton hears, it sounds like he's making plans. He's talking to his daughter, and he's making plans to come over and see them after work. So in Easton's eyes, he's gone back to Laura. And then Tasha comes home, and she's like fawning all over Easton in front of Blake, like sitting on his lap, petting him, kissing, nibbling, like completely flaunting their relationship in front of Blake. So Blake is upset, and he walks away. And the weeks go by, and he misses his friend. Blake was the best friend he ever had, and he misses him. And he hates being with Tasha. He's not in love with her anymore. He realizes he's not in love with her. It hasn't been in a while. But he was so stuck in that pattern, he didn't realize it until he had her back. He's in love with Blake, but Blake is back with Laura. What is he going to do? So a couple months go by, and he has to sit there every fucking day and see Blake working on his home, Pop's home, with plans of selling it to make a profit. He has to sit there and listen to him and Ashland talk about we're going to make $1 million profit on this house, and he's just sitting there, man he loves, stealing the last bit of hope he has, going home to Laura every night. So he is struggling with his sobriety, but he does not buckle. One Saturday afternoon, Blake is in town, and he's having lunch with Ashland. They're going over some paperwork for the house, some list of supplies for the house. And Ashland's like, why don't you come over for Thanksgiving? Your uncle's not going to be there. It's just going to be me, Laura, and I think the little girl's name is Jennifer. Come home. And he's like, it's not happening. Stop. If this is what you think is going to... Because he's like, he's like, I cannot take my share of the profit and just offer it as a wedding gift to you and Laura. He's like, if this is your plan, why you came into this venture with me, then we need to squash this now because it's not happening. I'm not going back with Laura. He never went back to Laura. The phone call Easton heard was something totally different. So he's like, it's not happening. Let it go. She cheated on me with my uncle. It's the whole time, not just once, years. So he walks out of the restaurant and goes in Ashlyn's truck and sits in the truck and waits for Ashlyn. While he's sitting in the truck, a fancy little Corvette pulls in. Nice tall man gets out, goes around, opens the door, takes the girl's hand, pulls her out, and it's Tasha. And she's got a very fat engagement ring on her finger. And they do some kissing and some petting, and oh shit, Tasha's engaged. And that is why she only spends the weekdays with with Easton, because her fiance, who had the Corvette had out-of-state plates, apparently is only home on the weekends. And that's why she's not with Easton on the weekends, because she's with her fiance. So Blake goes back to the house the next day, and when Easton wakes up, Blake is standing in the bedroom. And he's like, what the fuck are you doing here? And he's like, I thought you were back with Laura. He's like, no, what you heard, Jennifer had just had her bone marrow transplant, and I went to visit her at the hospital. I did not go to Laura's. We are not back together. He's like, I still love you. So they like fall into bed. They admit, Blake tells them that he's still in love with them, and Easton's like, you're the one I want to be with. So he tells Easton what he saw the day before. And Easton's like, oh my God, thank you. Thank God. He's like, why are you relieved? He's like, because I've been wanting a way out. But I didn't know. He's like, I wanted it for so long. I didn't think I had a right to just walk away because I don't love her. He's like, I want to be with you. They're back together. He packs up all of Tasha's stuff, and when she comes home that day, all of her things are packed in the front room. And he's like, I'm not in love with you. She's like, I'm not in love with you either. And then what the hell was this? And pretty much what it was when she saw him sober again, it triggered a whole bunch of memories, and she missed Camilla, and she thought that she could get pregnant and replace Camilla. And he's like, okay, first of all, what the fuck? Are you pregnant? She's like, no, I'm not. And he's like, okay, good. And secondly, you can't replace her. And she's like, I know, but it was just a confusion thing, and they agree to part amicably, on good terms. I can't say that word. So they end up parting on good terms, and she's like, she's like, you want Blake? And he's like, yes, I do. And she's like, all right, well, treat him good. And I hope he treats you good. He's like, he's the best. So she leaves. Blake, he texts Blake because Blake is out in the woods with Chester to give them privacy. And they're back to, and everything's good. And later that night, they're like lounging in bed. They're like eating ice cream and stuff and planning their future. And Easton knows he's in love with Blake. He just hasn't said the words yet. And then Blake gets a phone call, and Jennifer has died. So Blake falls apart. The bone marrow transplant did not work. He falls apart, and Easton's there to comfort him. They go to her funeral, and Easton, while everybody's heads are bowed to pray over the casket, Easton looks across and finds Blake's uncle like checking him out, smiling, checking him out. So he gets infuriated and he kind of like steps in front of Blake to block him and like challenges the uncle with, bitch, try me. So after the funeral's over, Mr. Ashland comes up. He's like, you need to go over there and talk to Laura. She needs you. And he's like, you need her. She needs you. And he's just like, no, I got him. He's like, this is between him and my daughter. They're in love. He's like, no, they're not. This is mine. So he accidentally outs them to Mr. Ashland. And he's like, oh, shit. Mr. Ashland's like, oh, shit. So they go home. And Blake is like, you do realize you just openly admitted that we were together. And he's like, oh, I guess I did. He's like, you know what? I openly admitted that to Tasha too. So they're out. And they're surprisingly both okay with it. They didn't think they would be, but they are. They go back to work on the house when the weekday shows up. And Mr. Ashland corners Blake at the back of the property. He's like, what the fuck was that I saw at the funeral? He's like, we're in love. We're together. He's like, this can't be possible. And he's like, you need to go home to Laura. And he finally admits what his uncle did to him. And that Laura knew what his uncle did to him and still had a 4-year affair with a 4-year affair with him. He's like, that's not possible. He goes, it is possible. And he's like, and Ashland's like, is that why your grandfather kicked you out? Because they've known each other for years, since they were teenagers. Him and Laura went to high school together. That's how they knew each other. He's like, yes, that's exactly why I got kicked out. So he's like, oh my God. He's like, yeah, so I can't be with somebody who has that kind of moral compass that they can have a willing affair for years, have a baby with that person, and then let me get, because when it came out, the truth, the uncle's like, okay, tells Blake, you can't be around Jennifer anymore. She's mine. You're out. So Laura let him do that, and Laura's going to raise Jennifer with a pedophile. And at this point, Easton has joined them and got his arm around Blake, making it obvious that they're together. He's like, so this is real? And they're like, yes, this is real. He's like, well, what's going to happen now? I've got $30,000 invested in this house, and I've lost 3 contracts to make this my main focus. I've lost tens of thousands of dollars for this house. He's like, I don't know what to do about that. He's like, well, my workers are paid up to the end of the week. They can stay here, finish the week, and you have till the end of the week to figure out what to do. And at this point, they know they're losing the house. And Easton's like, it's okay. It's just a house. We can rebuild Pop-Pop's legacy somewhere else. Don't worry about it. Sell the house. Get your profit. Your part of the profit to turn into a bed and breakfast. And we'll take that profit and we'll buy another property. And we'll just start over somewhere else. We can still bring back Pop-Pop's legacy just on a different piece of property. Well, Blake knows Easton can say that all day long, but eventually Easton's going to start resenting him. But what can he do? He's in a legal contract with Ashland. He can't get out of it. So rumors start to spread around the workers at the house. They neither deny or acknowledge them. They don't go out of their way to hide. They don't go out of their way to flaunt. They just act like they normally do any other time of the week. But then one day, they're in the kitchen. Blake's putting a pizza in the oven, and for lunch. And Easton comes in, and they start making out. And one of the workers comes in and catches them. Like, oh, whoa. And instead of pulling away from each other and acting like that nothing was happening, they're just sitting there and they're like still holding each other. They're like, what? And he's like, well, the tiles for the roof, because the roof was leaking. They're like, the tiles for the roof are in. Where do you want us to put it? He's like, put it in the barn. He's like, well, the barn collapsed last night. He's like, oh shit. That's what that noise was. So he's like, hang on. He's like, tells Easton to take care of the pizza. He's going to go outside and deal with that. He's like, all right, whatever. So Blake and the worker leave. Easton sets the timer on his phone to come down and take the pizza out, and then goes upstairs to the attic to start going through stuff that they need to get rid of because they've got like 2 days left. The house is gone. They don't have $30-something thousand to come up with. It's lost cause. So a couple hours later, about an hour or so later, Blake comes in. The house is like smoking. The pizza's burnt to a crisp, and Easton's nowhere to be seen. So he's like running around, and he finds Easton up in the attic, and he's like just sitting there, like hunched over, not moving. And it's kind of freaking him out, because it's kind of giving him the Blair Witch vibes, you know. So he runs over, and he's like, grabs him, he's like, baby, what's wrong? And Easton's fine. He's just kind of like out of it. And he's like, I found it. And he's like, what did you find? And he's like, Pop Pop's treasure. The whole book. I forgot to mention this, but throughout the whole book, they talk about how Pop Pop had said that the great-grandfather, after he built the house, he had money left over, so he stashed it, put it in a little metal box, and hid it in the house. And it was just a fairy tale, you know, that the grandparents told the grandkids about hidden treasures, you know, just something exciting. And he's like, but he found it. And sure enough, it was filled with currency from the early 1900s, stocks and bonds, jewelry. It was coins, gold coins, I think, were in there. I don't remember. Excuse me. I don't remember exactly what was in there, but they found it. So they haul ass, take it down to an appraiser, and it's more than enough to pay off Ashland. So they saved their house. With what was left over, they cleaned up the orchard, they replanted the orchard, and the last chapter of the book was like 4 years later. The orchard is alive and well. They've already had their first year open. They didn't make a profit, but they had enough to pay their bills. Easton and Blake are now married. They're happy, and they're happy. They saved the house. They brought it back. They rebuilt Pop Pop's legacy. They're married, and they're both sober, and they've never been happier. And that's the end. I skipped over a few things here and there because, you know, obviously the time. But anyways, that's it. It's called My White Knight. It's under Ollie Dupree. It is on KU. It is in hardback and paperback. If you're interested, check it out. It doesn't have much traction on it. I mean, it's been out for almost just under 2 years. But all my work is word of mouth only. And I don't really talk much about it because of the alcoholism, the suicide, even though the little girl is never on page, he's just, the closest you come is that one phone conversation that he has with her, and it's just one-sided. You know, you don't hear her, so she's never actually on page. The little girl still dies, and I know that can be triggering. So because of those triggers, unless somebody's specifically looking for a book with that stuff in it, I don't recommend it. So what little traction it has, people have found it on their own. just because they're looking at books underneath my name. Is what they've said, going through my collection. But anyways, hey, check it out. Enjoy it. And that's it. All right. You have a good day.